Hello, this is Dave from the Wizard's Keep in Muncie, Indiana, and today I'm going to continue my series of counting down my top 80 board games of all time. With this video, I'm going to talk about my number 60 through 51 favorite game. And my number 60 game is Suro. Now, Suro is kind of a simple tile laying game. And what you do in Suro is each tile has a series of lines or paths on it. When you place it on the board in front of a piece that you control, your piece is going to move along that path to the end of the tile, and hopefully not the end of the board, because your goal is to try to stay on the board as long as possible. And your opponent will be placing their own tiles, moving their pieces around. But the other neat factor is, so you must always place your tile in front of your piece. If your opponent has a piece that's next to where your piece is, so when you place the tile, it's also in front of their piece, it's going to move their piece as well. So your goal is to try to be the last person standing on the board. And so it's kind of a simple, quick, fast game, and actually one of the games I like to break out at the end of the night if I've already been playing a series of games and I'm kind of not quite done gaming, but I don't want to get involved in another longer game, or if I have a game group going but somebody's running late, and so instead of just sitting around waiting for them to play, you can play this one, because by the time they show up, you should be ready for the next game. And that is what I like about Suro. My number 59th favorite game is Kakao. Now, Kakao is also a tile laying game, but this one's a little more strategic. In Kakao, each tile you place is going to have 4 workers on that tile, but the sides that the workers are located on may not be evenly distributed, meaning you could have a tile that has 1 worker on each side, but you're more likely to have tiles that have maybe 2 workers on one side, 1 worker on another, and another side is going to be blank, so that adds up to 4 workers in total on the square tile. Now, the purpose of those workers is wherever you place that tile, what other tiles that tile is adjacent to, or where those workers are touching, are going to trigger the actions on the tile that you place next to. So in Kakao, what you're doing is you're harvesting cocoa beans or chocolate beans, and so if you place 2 workers, or place a tile with 2 workers on it to the side next to a cocoa farm, you're going to generate 2 coffee or cocoa beans, and then you can later process those beans into chocolate to get different victory points. So I like the kind of nature of how you're utilizing these tiles with workers on them and deciding where to place them. And it's all kind of positioning, because there's also good like ruined temples, and whoever has the most workers adjacent to that temple in the game is going to score the most points for that temple. So you got to consider that as you're placing which side of the tile you want to face which direction, and that is Kakao. My number 58th favorite game is more theme intensive, and that is Mysterium. And Mysterium, it's a cooperative game, so everybody's working together in the game, but one player is a ghost that has been murdered, where the other players are psychic investigators. And what the psychic investigators are trying to do is sort of like similar to the game Clue. You're trying to figure out who murdered the ghost, what room the ghost was murdered in, and what weapon or item was used to kill the ghost. How you find that out is the ghost is going to hand out these textless art cards, sort of like Dixit cards if you're familiar with that game. And what these textless art cards are supposed to be are these kind of clues to the psychic investigators, and they've got to take these textless art cards and kind of interpret what the ghost is trying to tell them. Is the art on the card trying to point to a specific suspect, or let's say the art on the card indicates a knight in battle, and so the knight's using a sword, so maybe that means that the ghost was killed by a bladed weapon. So you're like, oh, maybe it is the knife that is responsible for killing the ghost. At the end of each round, the players are going to kind of vote on who or which item, room, or suspect, depending on what round it is, that the ghost is trying to give them clues to. And then at that point, the ghost, who otherwise can't speak and only pass out these textless cards, will let them know if they are right or they're wrong. If they're right, they can move on to the next objective. If they're wrong, they've got to try another round of figuring out if it is the murderer, or does the cards indicating for the murderer, or the weapon, or the room that they're in. And you've only got 7 rounds, each round indicating an hour before time runs out, and I guess the ghost is gone forever. And that is Mysterium. My number 57th favorite game, also with this kind of gloomy gothic theme, is Letters from Whitechapel. And Letters from Whitechapel is a hidden movement game, sort of reminiscent of the classic board game Scotland Yard. But in this one, the one player plays Jack the Ripper, and the other players are kind of members of the Scotland Yard police force trying to catch Jack the Ripper. This game plays over the course of 4 nights, kind of representing the 4 different nights that Jack the Ripper murdered his different victims. At the beginning of a night, the Jack the Ripper is going to point out on the board where a victim has been murdered at. And then Jack the Ripper player is going to move across the board trying to get back to their secret base before the police can find them. But the neat thing of this game is whereas the police have different pieces on the board that they move around trying to look for clues to indicate where Jack the Ripper has moved to, Jack the Ripper does not have a piece on the board. Jack the Ripper instead writes down their movement on a piece of paper behind a hidden screen. So just based off of the clues of places where Jack the Ripper has moved from victim to their secret lair, the Scotland Yard players need to take that information to figure out where Jack the Ripper is located at and catch them before they make it back to their secret lair on the 4th night. If they're able to do so, they're going to win. But if Jack the Ripper can kill all of its victims and get back to its lair on the 4th night, then the Jack the Ripper player is going to win. I really like deduction games anyway, just like taking clues to figure them out, to like what those mean, to be able to take that information and deduce the player's movement. But also there's a lot of great suspense in the game, especially if you're the Jack the Ripper player, as players are discussing, did he move to this space, or is he in this space now? And maybe you're in that space, but you can't say anything. You got to keep a pure poker face, hoping you don't give any away information as they're, that they might look in that space. And then it's great when they think that you're in the space that you're actually in, but then they talk themselves out of it, and they pick another location, and you're able to squeak through scot-free. And that's the things I like about Letters from Whitechapel. My number 56th favorite game is an area control game called Small World. Now, Small World, I've never been that big of a fan of the classic game Risk. It's kind of random and long. And also a lot of times in games like Risk or classic war games, it kind of feels, especially if you get crushed at the very beginning of the game, your army is decimated, and you're just kind of limping along until the game ends. Small World is an area control type of game where you get different races, but if your race gets kind of crippled at the beginning, that's fine. You send that race into decline, and you can pick a new race, starting with a new group of refreshed reinforcements that you can go around gobbling up territories with. The other thing that's neat, and that's really one of the great things about Small World is at the beginning of the game, you're going to randomize these different races with different powers. Each race kind of has a power, and then a power is an ability as well. So each race and power combination kind of has 2 abilities, and every game those combinations are going to be different. That adds a lot of replayability to the game. And also, over the course of the game, you're going to change different races. So over the course of the game, you can try out different strategies in the same game. So maybe at the beginning of the game, you're playing a really aggressive attacking type of race. Then you put some of those into decline as they peter out, and you grab a new race that's a little more defensive. So you're setting up fortifications to kind of clamp down and just generate victory points turn after turn while your opponents are attacking against your territories. So there's just lots of different options and different strategies you can do over the course of the game. And even if you're losing, you always kind of feel like you're involved doing different things, and that's what I like about Small World. My number 55th favorite game is kind of like the granddaddy of modern Euro games, but still a classic, and that is Settlers of Catan. Settlers of Catan, if somehow you've not had a chance to play this classic masterpiece, is a kind of a trading resource management game. What you're going to do, it's a race to 10 victory points. How you get those victory points is placing different settlements on the board, upgrading those settlements, maybe buying different development cards which give you victory points. But ultimately what happens is each turn you're going to roll 2 6-sided dice, and those dice are going to be are going to trigger different tiles on the board, and anybody who has settlements adjacent to those tiles is going to generate the resources from that tile, even if it's not even your turn. So another player rolls an 8, and you've got a settlement on a tile that's in a forest. You're going to generate wood based off of that 8. And that's one of the fun things about Catan is you're always engaged even when it's not your turn. The other thing is you're also always engaged even when it's not your turn, is because there's this diplomacy aspect of it and trading resources. So even if it's not your turn, you're kind of involved because you might be making a deal or trading with another player on their turn. The way the game is set up, there's 5 different resources, and you're probably not going to have access to every resource in the game, so you're going to be forced to trade with other players. And that's one of the main things I really like about Catan. I've played it a billion times, but still, it makes the list. My number 54 favorite game is another Euro game. I like Euro games. It's Castles of Burgundy. Now, Castles of Burgundy is kind of a dice drafting game. Picked on depending on the dice you at the beginning of the turn, you're going to roll dice, and then you're going to take those dice and you're going to place them on different locations, kind of triggering different actions. Either that's gathering different tiles, or that might be placing tiles on your home board as you're kind of like trying to build your little city or infrastructure. And being a classic, it's by designer Stefan Feld, and what he is known for is these kind of point salad games, meaning that there's a lot of different ways to generate victory points, and Castles of Burgundy is no exception. So you might be placing these tiles on your city board to kind of develop victory points, or you might be using your dice to sell different goods to get victory points. So there's lots of different options, and that's one of the neat things about Castles of Burgundy, because every turn there's lots and lots of choices. My number 53rd favorite game is a little simpler 2-player card game called Thunder and Lightning. Now, Thunder and Lightning is basically a card game version of the classic mass market game Stratego. So if you're familiar with Stratego, you're going to have some of the general ideas or concepts of Thunder and Lightning. In Thunder and Lightning, one player is playing Thor, the other player is playing Loki, and each player... one of the players is looking for Odin's ring, where the other person is looking for Odin's staff, I believe. And those ring and staff are going to be hidden cards in one of the other players' decks. Each turn, you're going to have so many actions, and those actions will be placing cards face down in front of you in different rows and columns, or you can be using your face down cards to attack your opponent's face down cards across from you. Now, you don't know who's necessarily going to win these attacks if you attack your opponent's cards, because, like in Stratego, what you're attacking is going to be anonymous to you, unless you've attacked with that thing with your card before, or your opponent's card has been attacked before to reveal it. So when you attack somebody, if both cards are anonymous, you flip them over, and whoever has the higher value is most likely going to win. There's a few exceptions. There's certain cards that specifically take out certain other cards, so there's always some sort of rock, paper, scissors element to it, so you don't get just the highest card on the board and mow through every other card, because there's going to be something that takes it out. But usually the higher value card is going to win, until eventually your goal is to find either Odin's staff or Odin's ring. If you encounter that card on the board and take it out, then you're ultimately going to win. And that's kind of the neat thing on Thunder and Lightning, is this kind of bluffing aspect, or the strategy of where you place certain cards, when you attack your opponent's cards, things like that. And that's the neat thing about Thunder and Lightning. My number 52nd favorite game has a lot of different variants to it, and I picked the 2-player cooperative version, and that is Codenames Duet. But this slot probably kind of belongs to all games Codenames. Now, Codenames is a word association game, and in Codenames Duet, it's a cooperative 2-player game. In Codenames, different cards are going to be placed on the board here, and each card is going to have different words on those cards. And you're trying to indicate to your partner which of those words are supposedly codenames for different agents in your agency, without accidentally getting them to pick an assassin, which if they pick the assassin card, then you're both going to lose. So you also only have X number of turns. In the case of Codenames Duet, you have 9 total turns as a pair to discover 15 words. So that's kind of a neat thing about the game. It's sort of like Taboo, because in order for them to discover words, you've got to give them a clue, and they're going to take that clue to be able to pick a word. And when you give that clue, you can say anything and then a number to try to indicate how many different words on the board have that number. So you could say farm animal 1 if you want them to just pick a chicken on the board. But ultimately, you want to get them to pick more than one word because you only have so many turns. So instead, maybe maybe there's words as like potato and chicken. So instead, you're kind of like Thanksgiving or something like that, trying to get them to pick multiple words on the board. But like I said, you got to make sure that you don't give a clue. Let's say pizza or something like that was another word. You wouldn't want to say food 3 or food 2 if pizza was the assassin, because they might pick that instead. So you got to kind of figure out different ways to give clues to your partner, so they pick the words that you want them to. In a regular version of Codenames, it's team versus team, so it's not really about number of turns. It's basically trying to get the number of your partner to pick the number of words that you need to win the game before your rival team does the same thing. And my last game, at least for this video, my number 50 first favorite game is an area control game based on politics. That is 1960 Making of a President. 1960 Making of a President, it's a 2-player game where one person basically plays Richard Nixon, or Richard Nixon's campaign manager, and the other player plays John F. Kennedy's campaign manager, and your goal is to win the presidency for your particular politician. I'm a big fan of politics, especially political history, so it's one of the things I really like about this game. It has tons of cards that have references to the 1960 election. That if you're unfamiliar, I was not super familiar with until I played this particular game. Like, for example, I guess Dwight Eisenhower, who was the acting president at the time during the election, and Richard Nixon was his vice president, was slow to endorse Richard Nixon for whatever reason, and so that could be a card that's in the game that John F. Kennedy player can play to kind of hurt the Nixon player. So he uses these historical events as cards in the game. Also, the cards, you can kind of play them for their events, for actions, or they just give you resources, and you take those resources and place them on different states to kind of try to control those states. Because ultimately, at the end of the game, it's whoever controls each state is going to get the electoral votes from that state, or effectively winning that state, and whoever has the most electoral votes is going to win the presidency. And that's what I like about 1960 Making of a President. Well, thank you for checking out this video. And as always, if you have any questions about any of these games, or any games in general, feel free to contact me on Facebook or on YouTube, or feel free to stop into the Wizard's Keep. And until then, thank you for watching this video.